All right, folks, welcome to another podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest. We actually ran into each other twice here in the past few months in two very significant events. The first was in AmFest in the United States, which you remembered me, but I met you, but I forgot because we met millions of people. And I thought, oh, she probably saw one of my podcasts because when we met the second time, you're like, we know each other from somewhere, and I
hmm
didn't realize it. And then when you said, I was like, oh, of course, of course.
hmm
And so that was just a fun reconnection, and then realizing how um, we're both kind of combating a lot of the misinformation, disinformation out there from completely different angles. I'd say you do it more in a professional way, which is why you're here on the podcast today, because I am happy to be able to bring people that really know what they're doing. Really, I'm just a novice in this. My field of expertise is fighting in wars, executive protection, hands-on. I'm less, I know a lot of people give me a lot of credit, but it's really the people that I bring onto the show. They are the experts. And I was just so pleased to reconnect with you here in Jerusalem during the Combating Anti-Semitism conference, which you were one of the panelists on. And I thought, also you were one of the most relevant voices on the panel, actually. And we're bringing an angle that I think is just rarely heard on a lot of, these kind of gatherings and forums. So Karys Rhea is an American political commentator and former producer at the Epoch Times and Newsmax. She is a fellow with the Middle East Forum, ambassador for Israel365 Action, which that's one area we have a connection with, is our good friends at Israel365, by the way, and a rising leader at the Global Liberty Institute and recording artist at Baste Institute. She is currently writing a book about how right wing, and this is where I'm going to have a mouthful, and you're going to have to correct me later. Identitarianism
You
is
got it.
is undermining President Trump's vision for a mega movement and jeopardizing the soul of America. So, any case, you're going to be writing a book on this issue, or you're working on it, and it should be
hmm
out in 2026 this year.
hmm hmm
Which friends, when we're done with this podcast, or as you're listening, you can go into the description, follow Karys social links that we're going to have there, and look out for that book, because I think this is going to be a very important book for the times that we're living in today. And that's really the subject matter we're going to cover here this morning. Can you give us a little bit of background about how you got involved with this? Like, how did this end up being a subject matter that you
Mm.
got into? I mean, this is a very niche kind of thing, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I remembered you distinctly when I saw you at the Combating Anti-Semitism conference, but I didn't remember where I had seen you, right? And like
Yeah,
you said, it was at Turning Point Amfest. And when I put the two
yeah,
together, it was really because I was like, oh, he's this handsome man here at this Combating Anti-Semitism conference. And I remember
yeah.
this really handsome man at the Turning Point Amfest conference. And that's how I put the two together.
But the
Um,
funny thing was, I said, "Oh, you probably recognize me from like the podcast. Maybe I wear a hat, I look different," and so it was just
no,
funny
it
because then you're
was
like, "No, I actually remember you where you're actually wearing your
it was
suit and
in
the
real
other look."
life, if you can believe it. If you can believe it. Good old-fashioned real life.
I know.
So yeah, so thank you. And also it's Karis. It's like Paris with a K. It's I know it's a
Exactly.
mouthful, but yeah. So how did I come to work on the right wing angle of anti-Semitism? Well, I had fought it for over a decade on the left and in Islamist spaces in various nonprofit organizations, counter Islamist organizations, Zionist organizations, Jewish organizations, everything from the Middle East Forum to Creative Community for Peace to Camera to Jewish National Fund for a little bit, to Keystone Institute for a little bit. So I was kind of all over the map in terms of the Zionist NGO arena. And then
Mm,
I got really sick of working from home. This was even before the pandemic. So I switched into broadcast journalism because I had
yeah.
a degree in broadcast journalism, an undergraduate degree. So as you
Mm,
said in the introduction, I kind of became more of a generalist, and I left the very focused anti-Semitism and counter-Islamist spaces and went into kind of general conservative commentary.
Mm.
And it was also because there was other things I really cared about. You know, as I became more involved in politics, I really cared about the fight against China. When the pandemic happened, I was very involved in the health freedom movement, and I cared about the censorship that was happening online of prominent doctors and scientists and health officials who were just asking questions about what was about like the actual scientific basis for a lot of the top down policies that were being implemented. But then I after October 7th happened, I started to notice that the culture was shifting in terms of my conservative my conservative peers and my conservative spaces that I was in, and I started to see a lot of the same tropes that had been echoed on the left for so long emerge in conservative spaces, which was just insane to me because since World War II, I would say that the Republican Party, since after World War II, has been an incredibly nurturing community for
Hmm.
Jews, for Zionists, particularly because of the evangelical community in the United States. So this was very disconcerting, and I was one of the earliest to notice this. It actually happened a little bit before October 7th, but after October 7th, it really kind of exploded and started becoming more mainstream and normalized. So I just started speaking and writing about it. And I left Epoch in August because I got an offer from a publisher to write a book. And now essentially I'm just trying to fight what's going on within my own camp as best I can while writing this book, which is
Mm.
the most intimidating thing I've ever done.
Oh, trust me, I know. I'm in the middle of writing my book, and it's been a few years. So, not to mention delays because of wars and whatever. But um, and I really look forward to that book because I think you're onto something that I've noticed very few people kind of talk about it from the right, I would say, or at least articulate and kind of pinpoint all these different things and connect
Mhm.
them because it's like it seems like these are all different things, but they're all connected. And one of the things I noticed that you paid attention to was that this is all post COVID, and that's something that I've kind of pointed out to people, and you can tell they're just kind of like, wait, what? I'm like, haven't you noticed that it was after COVID is when a lot of this crazy stuff happened?
Mhm.
And then I explain, I say, I'm just observing. This is my thing. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a researcher. I'm just observing society around me, and I'm making my conclusions that it seems like, why am I the only one talking about this, right? And
Mhm.
so I just said, have you noticed that people can't have normal conversations about things that we disagreed on or even agreed on anymore? Like people are just completely divisive. And I said, I think it's because people got into their devices and you've been socially programmed by the social media giants to divide us and to make us more, diversive, so to speak. And then you see this in the right camp, like you pointed out, and it's very troublesome. Is there a connection? Am I just seeing wrong? Is there a
No, no,
connection
no.
with that? And
The
and and and, and
pandemic,
yeah.
the
Can you tie
pandemic,
it all in there for?
yeah, the pandemic changed our society for the worse in a myriad of ways. It was not just the virus itself that killed people. It was not just the heinous reaction of governments around the world imposing lockdowns and mandates that killed even more people. It was actually the sociological effects of of essentially locking down people and making a youth, a generation of young people now completely indebted to their screens for information. I mean, that
Mm,
was already happening, and
right.
this just sort of solidified it, right? So now you
Hmm.
have these young people who they do not get their identities, they do not get their ideas about culture and politics from books, from the news, from in person interaction. They are getting it from memes, from social media, from TikTok, from Snapchat. They're all 6 second experts, what they call them, right? In any given topic, because that's all they know. And I mean, this just has incredible knockdown effects too, because what this does is essentially then make young people angry, anxious, resentful, depressed. Why? Because when you are deprived of social interaction, when you are deprived of sunlight, of going outside, of working your joints, of actually risking hitting on a girl, hitting on hitting on a girl in a park and then being rejected, you are not you are not developing normally, and
Mhm.
um, and developing the capacities that you need to as a young person to actually confront society. And you're not getting the oxytocin you need. You're getting all the dopamine from social media, but you're not getting
Yeah.
the oxytocin, which you can only receive from actual like in-person reaction, or speaking to somebody, like
Hmm.
and they're all addicted to porn, right? And so they think they're getting their sexual needs met. They think they're getting their emotional needs met because they're always connected and online. But like I said, it's not
Right.
real. And so they're actually all just depressed and then over medicated and resentful and angry. And then what are they going to do about that? They're going to look for a scapegoat. They're going to look for somebody to blame for the fact that they are, they've essentially been robbed of their youth by these,
Mm.
these tech companies and by governments who imposed lockdowns, and destroyed the economy, giving them less and less of a shot, making, creating a world in which their parents had it better than they did. And so they're angry and they're going to look around for somebody to blame. And then you have all these podcasters, these conservative podcasters who are now
Mm.
in independent media, right? Because conservatives do not trust the mainstream media anymore. We do not trust any of our institutions, largely because of COVID and what we saw happen with the private public collusion to censor us, to silence us, the utter oppression of conservative thought in mainstream media, but also in healthcare, in universities, in all of these taste making institutions. And so you have this entire realm of independent media that conservatives are now immersed in, what Konstantin Kisin calls podcastistan. And this is who these young Gen Zers, these, what do they call the Zoomers? This is who they're listening to.
Yeah.
And these podcasters are no better than the mainstream media that we were fighting against. They play off people's emotions, they elicit
Yeah.
rage, they're sensational, they're edgelords, they're trying to say the most outrageous, taboo things so that they can, because that is what is going to go viral, that is what is going to get them clicks. And so they're not actually doing what Charlie Kirk would have done, which is try to get these people to channel their emotions properly into hard work and labor, into personal responsibility, into marriage and family and community. But they're actually saying, no, you are a victim. You have been a victim of the government, of the left wing, ecosystem, of the Jews, of the Zionists, and you should channel that further into rage and protests and vulgarity and into overthrowing the system, which is the exact sort of neo-revolutionary mindset that we see on the left. And so you
Mm.
have a whole generation of young so-called conservatives that are playing the victim, that are using their theology and their faith and their conservative values, essentially as a cover to do exactly what the left did, which is to
Mhm.
just call for the entire system not to be reformed, but to be completely uprooted and to be redrawn in this authoritarian fascistic image that more aligns with their now far right views.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's insane. I never thought that I would be living in a day and age where, as a conservative, that I do not want to associate with the conservative movement, so to speak, right, to a certain degree. And I've kind of always been like that. I've always been a conservative here in Israel with my politics, but I've never associated with these extreme kind of ways of either talking about your politics or whatever. I've always believed in trying to be as rational as possible, not emotional, not to fire back at the left when they do mean, ugly tactics, and I mean, not to get into that knee jerk reaction of like we need to hit back, and it's like, okay, this is what I believe. It's based off my biblical values, which has always been the baseline for me as to what guides my political opinions, right? So what's my biblical view that shapes my political view, and how do we discuss these things in a rational, normal way? I can have a conversation with anybody I completely disagree with without getting all up in arms and emotional about it. But it's like the right has started, like you said, like to play into that same emotion driven politics, rage, like you pointed
Grievance
out,
based. Yes, all based on
Yeah, grievance and all
grievances.
that. Yeah, and that's like it completely does not how to say, nothing to identify with that at all. Because
Right.
guess what? I was a victim of the culture I grew up in as being the only white kid that grew up in northern Israel with a bunch of Arab Jews, right? And so I got bullied for being the white guy. And I kind of
Mm,
joke about it, that, for me, my white privilege story isn't maybe your white privilege story,
interesting.
in North America. You talk about white privilege. I'm like, I'll tell you all about it. I got my
Right.
butt kicked for being the white American kid, so to speak. But in
Well,
any case, I never,
now for
it's not
these,
something that I whine about. You know what I mean? I don't cry
right.
about it. It's what made
Completely.
me who I am. And I'm actually happy I went through the bullying and all that stuff that made me more of a resilient person as a
Mhm.
human.
Mhm. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the whole identity as being a white male has now become the exact same uh, victim identity that the left is using when they're talking about, black, trans, intersectional, women or whatever, whatever the
Sure.
whole gamut is of the LGBTQ rainbow or whatever, and the
Mm.
various identities that they put on top of the oppression totem pole. Well, now you see the right doing the same thing. If you are a white male, then you are automatically oppressed, and you are automatically entitled. I mean, just listen to Tucker Carlson. Like, Tucker Carlson will tell you, like, anti-Semitism is horrible, but like, it's not nearly as bad as the anti-white discrimination. That is the worst discrimination that we've seen in this country. And it's
Yeah.
like, and it's like he is playing into the exact same victimhood mentality that the left is. It's like, look,
Hmm.
white people have started being oppressed in certain institutions, in certain spaces, but it's almost like he's making the same, like, systemic racist argument that the left was making, like that we have a systemically racist society against black people, and now Tucker's doing the same thing about white people. It's
Yeah.
not true. You have to go case by case. It is true that that in Hollywood, that the Writers Guild is now only like 12% white. It is true that white people are being discriminated against in Hollywood. But you need to go institution by institution, and you cannot just um, blanket categorize all white people as now being like victimized by the system, unless you want to play the exact same game as the left. And it's not
Hmm.
healthy. It's
Yeah.
not healthy to categorize like that. Um, you know, I do
It's
not feel
exaggerating the
I'm
grievances.
white, and I do not feel victimized as a white person. I have not been denied certain career opportunities because I'm a white,
Hmm.
Ashkenazi Jew. Like other
Yeah.
people have, I'm sure. But if this was a systemic problem, then I would see it with my white friends all across the board. And
Yeah.
I don't see it. I see it selectively. I see it selectively in certain
Correct.
spaces that have become politicized, but not every space
Mm.
has become politicized. And that is how Tucker is acting. He's creating a grievance based movement. And he's just using all of the same talking points as the left did with minorities and blacks and Muslims and trans females, but he's doing the same thing with white Christian males. It's an identity
Mm.
movement through and through. And one other thing I will say that I didn't touch on, which I usually do, which was a
Mm.
knockdown effect of the pandemic, was the conspiratorialism that
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
opened up for conservatives, which is not something you see as much on the left, right? The pandemic made us much more conspiratorial because there were
Yeah.
real conspiracies, real cover ups during the pandemic, not just with,
Correct.
COVID coming from a lab and, the development of the vaccines and all this stuff, but also with things that just occurred in that time period. The whole Russiagate scandal, right? The
Yep.
cover up of Obama and Clinton to frame Trump as some sort of Russian asset, and then the entire cover up with the Hunter Biden laptop, and how you had deep staters trying to force social media to essentially suppress that story so that Biden would win the election. So I think that when you have so much of this sinister private public collusion before your very eyes, then for some of us, something can break in our brains, and we start to look at conspiracy theories as sort of this badge of honor to embrace. It's like, oh, well, we have the secret knowledge about everything, right? And the entire
Right.
world is living in a matrix, but we know the truth about walking
Hmm.
on the moon, and we know the truth about about the Holocaust. And it's like every stereotypical conspiracy that is just thrown their way, they will embrace it. When in reality, it's the same thing that Tucker is doing with the white identity movement. It's putting a blanket over an entire category of of narratives, and saying that, like, oh, by virtue of the fact that this is a that this is framed as a conspiracy means it must be true, when in reality there are real conspiracies, but you have to evaluate each one that comes your way on its merits, and you have to have the proper discernment of history to know which facts are just fabricated and created out of thin air, or created in bad faith, and which ones are actually presented, and created in good faith, right? It's very
Hmm.
hard with anti-Semitism when you decide that when you decide that you're a conspiracy theorist, and obviously that is going to lead you into all of the conspiracies that have been pushed about Jews for thousands of years. It's very hard to discern whether those things are false, because they have 2,000 years of tracks and tropes and lies that have been cultivated to make it seem as if they're true. You read David Irving, the notorious Holocaust denier, and his analysis of the Holocaust is so meticulous, right? And presented as if it's scientific and academic, right? That if you didn't know anything about the history of anti Semitism and how anti Jewish tropes have manifested over the years, and you just picked up a David Irving book and wrote it, then you'd be like, oh, wow, this just is so convincing, right? So there has to be
Exactly.
some sort of grounding that these people have to be able to exercise proper discernment. And so many of us don't have it, because people are people, and we are just tribal, just like the left is, and we fall prey to
Yeah.
exactly the same type of instincts that the left has.
Hmm. You know, I'll tell you my personal experience going to Amfest. I expected to see, more of, like, the kind of people, like I said, that I relate with, the conservative crowd, so to speak, right? Um, and I'll put it like this: the kind of people that I befriend, right? They're my close relationship of people. Some of them are nerdy, not athletic, not, warrior types, which is totally cool. Some are, the warrior community, security, defense, and like your man's man, right? Um, and that's all fine. But in both of those crowds of people that I relate with, if you like, those two extremes, they are all, how do you say, secure in their identity and who they are,
Mm,
because they're grounded. They're you know what I mean, they're strong people. They have a strong spirit about them. They're not wishy washy and like, one of those guys that you shake their hand and it feels like a dead fish.
mm,
All that to say that when I went to Amfest, what I saw was again, it was a very large number of these young boys, and I call them boys because to me, a lot of them were just like these young boys dressed in suits, almost like copycats of trying to be like this, um, like carbon copies of each other, so to speak. And I'm like, who are they trying to copy? I honestly don't know. Like, who are they trying to copy? Right. Because I can
mm,
just tell they almost looked, but none of them was like a leader. None of them was, not
mm,
none. Again, the broad stroke of what I saw, most of them were not very strong. They didn't, you could tell because they would travel in groups, like almost like fish. There wasn't like independence. There wasn't security, is what I'm saying. And that bothered me because I'm like, if this is the conservative group of people in America where you're raising kids, boys who are not men, who are not secure
yes.
in who they are, in their identity, that to me is troublesome. That bothers me. That means you're an easily influenced young man. And then you'll go running after this moron Gaines, or Byron Gaines, my bad, moron Gaines individual, which, by the
Yeah.
way, wouldn't debate me. Okay. I know that
Of
the
course not.
guys reached out to his staff and said, hey, here's an IDF soldier. If he's wanting to debate, they weren't interested. They don't want to
Yeah, of
touch that.
course.
Right.
Of course.
because again, it's like that's my point. It's like you don't want to challenge a real alpha male. You're happy
Yeah.
to challenge all these beta loser. Again, sorry to, I mean, I don't want to like hate on people, but you gotta, as a man, your responsibility is that you're, to me at least, is you got to be a leader. You have to
Mhm.
find your identity. You have to lead your family by minimum as a human being. And I don't know any woman that want to marry these kind of guys that are just not secure in themselves and build a good future together.
Yeah.
Things that
Absolutely.
Charlie
It's
talked about, like you pointed out, by the way, in
completely.
contrast.
Completely. It's so sad that the young men in the culturally conservative movement are now essentially embracing this like beta male like emasculation that the manosphere and the incel culture has been kind of pushing on them, much in the same way that the left's young males have been completely emasculated by all of the third wave feminist
Hmm.
poppycock. Right. You have these podcasters like Myron Gaines and Andrew Tate, these incredibly low IQ individuals, and Nick Fuentes, that are telling them that marriage is gay, and they look at
Yeah,
females and they look at relationships in this incredibly formulaic way, like it's a game, and
yeah.
they organize their interactions with the opposite sex in these like numerical, like it's like they game theory out interactions with females, which which essentially makes them so unprepared to ever have a flourishing relationship with a woman, because they're acting like we are some like like inanimate like foreign objects that just need to be put in their proper categories in order to elicit reaction A and reaction B, as if a
Hmm.
relationship with a female is not like an ever like evolving, flowing, give and take, and very idiosyncratic and nuanced and individualistic um interaction. And
Mm.
it's so sad to see all of these young males being captured by these disgusting, misogynistic, supposedly alpha male, but really just just these it's just incel culture. That's all it is. It's
Yeah.
it's
It's a
and
bunch of
Myron
losers. It's a
Gaines,
bunch
and
of losers,
it's
you
a bunch
know?
of losers. And when you meet Myron Gaines in person, like as a female, when I met Myron for the first time, I did not expect him to be such a loser. Because when you are seeing somebody through a screen, right,
Yeah.
they're coming
Yeah.
across in one way, right? Myron
Correct.
Gaines is coming across as kind of, assertive and confident, right? But
Yep.
you meet
Yep.
him in real life, and he's this tall dude, and yet he takes up no space. Why? Because he has
Right.
bad posture. He will not look you
Yep.
in the eyes. Like literally,
Correct.
I've had like full on conversations with this man, and his
Yeah.
eyes are looking down, and then they move like side to side, and they will not
Yep.
land on you. His feet, he's fidgeting like back and
Right.
forth. He cannot stand on his own 2 feet confidently, and it's
Yep.
all a ruse. It's like, and yet these young
Yeah.
people are just buying into it because they
Yeah.
want they use the clicks and the followers as validation for their self-worth. And if you talk to
Yeah.
Myron and you say like, hey, will you date me, he'll literally say back to you, how many followers do you have? Like
Thank you.
it's such a
Yep.
tell. It is such
Yep.
a tell about his character, about what he cares about, that is
Yeah.
what he thinks gives you self-worth. Is these people live through the eyes of social media. They have no ability to actually project strength and confidence in the real world.
He's not a self-made man. He is a creation of millions of dollars that have been invested to create this fake persona. The guy's not even, that's not even his real name that you see him online. The dude's a Muslim. He grew up as a Muslim. He still is a Muslim. Okay, Muslims don't change unless they've converted
Right.
to
Which he did
Christianity
not.
typically,
Yeah.
and then they're very right, and then they're very open and strong about their faith. He's not. Okay, So a little fun fact for those of you that want to do a little bit of research, it doesn't take much. Even a moron like me can do a little bit of online research and figure out that this dude has a completely fake online presence, like you pointed out, and they're not self-made men. And they when they run into people who are, and again, I don't see myself as anything special. It's just like I'm literally just the normal Joe Schmo off the street. And if I'm willing to
In
confront
Israel.
you, yeah, in Israel, and if I'm willing to confront you on a debate on something, right, and you don't have, you don't have what it takes to challenge a nobody, you know, it says a lot about you, right? It
Yeah.
says a lot about you. Again, I love to use Charlie because he, to me, is a complete opposite of these losers. He would literally debate anybody. It was called the open mic sessions that he'd have on campuses, meaning anybody can walk up to that mic and debate him. And that's the challenge, or sorry, that's the salt of a real man versus these losers that we see like Byron and or Moron Gaines and Andrew Tate and all these other dudes. And by the way, to point out how weak Andrew is, because again, he is a harder to point out because he has this like warrior and fighter ring and all this stuff and rippled with muscles and all that. So you think, oh no, he's not a loser, right? I'll show you how he's a loser. Remember that Miami nightclub event where they played the Heil Hitler?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that, and I'm sure you saw this. Afterwards, he went on to the
Patrick Bet
Valuetainment
David show. Yeah.
Patrick Ben David show, and what did he do? What did he do? He
He backed off.
backtracked
Yeah.
of, oh, I just, and it's true. When you look at the footage, you don't see him rocking or throwing up the Heil Hitler thing. But guess what? What people don't pay attention to, and again, I watch things like a security guy, so I'm looking everything around it, not just him. Yeah, sure, you didn't catch him, but his brother right in front of him, next to Nick Fuentes, they are jamming and doing the Heil Hitler thing, and they're singing the lyrics all out. So you're telling me his brother, which they're like this, okay, is it what? You disassociate from your brother? Come on, man. Like, quit BSing us.
Yeah. It's
Just
just,
own up to the fact that you got caught. And but no, and that's something that annoys me with these people, and that's something you've pointed out, I've seen on
yeah.
your other interviews, is just look at what don't oh, I said that 10 years ago. No, you didn't. You're saying it yesterday, you're saying it today, and you're going to say it in the future again.
Yeah, I know these people can only dish it out. They can't really take it back unless that they
No.
know that they can unless they know that they can employ like rhetorical manipulative devices on you to
Yeah.
make you lose, regardless of what facts you point out. Um, yeah, Andrew Tate. That video came out a few days ago of him just talking about. It was like an old video that resurfaced about him talking about how he doesn't read books and he's like too intelligent for books. And then that surface, that was
Oh, really?
spreading and everybody was laughing at it. And so he put out another video where he was so angry and he's just like, these people are, they're such caricatures of themselves when they put out
Yeah.
videos. Like they don't realize that, yes, like they have millions of followers because the masses are gullible and they want to attach themselves to strong personalities. But like I said, they take that as evidence of their self-worth. So when Andrew Tate is defending himself against, people laughing at him for not reading books, what is his defense? His defense is, I am one of the most famous people on this planet and I have millions of followers and I have people always like, it's like, that's not where somebody's self-worth comes from. What
Yeah.
self-worth is genuine self-worth is built internally. It's not a result of external circumstances. Somebody who makes no money as like, I don't know, a mine, somebody who works in the mines for no money can have more self-worth, than some like billionaire. I mean,
Yep.
it's about internal cultivation of inner peace and inner contentment and a core, like a solid core that does not change at the whims of your external circumstances. It does not break when you lose a job or when you lose some fame or fortune, right? It is solid. That is the real measure of somebody's strength as a human being. It's inner strength, and Andrew Tate does not
Yeah.
have any of that. It's all external circumstances. It's all material wealth, and it's so obvious to some of us. And he doesn't even talk about
Exactly.
how like so many of his followers just hate watch him. Like they're just, you know what I mean? Like so,
Right. Wish I was you with all the girls and the car and the this and the that and all the right. It's materialism, right? Um, but here's what I find interesting. Because again, like you said, their self worth is in their following, their this, their that, their whatever. But again, let's get to the real bottom line of where these guys come from. You're not self-made people. You didn't create your platform because of your great points or how smart you are or any of those things. And one point that you pointed out was an example of, for example, Lauren Chen or
mm,
Chen, I think, right?
mm,
This anti-Israel and anti-Zionist Canadian influencer that was caught through their tenant media that her and her husband manage. They were caught funding, was it pro Russia propaganda for millions of dollars. And then they were
yeah,
also tied into a bunch of other influencers that we all know that represent the conservatives world and people that we all follow and know of. Apparently, they also were getting funding, knowingly or unknowingly. But I think this is really what it really boils down to: is these people are paid for and bought by the enemies of America, is what I'm seeing. Correct
mm.
me if I'm wrong on this, Andrew and all
So
these guys.
yeah, so the situation with Lauren Chen is an interesting one. She is
Yeah,
now alleging that this was just a Biden DOJ attack and that it had no actual validity to it. So we'll see how this plays out.
yeah,
One thing is for sure is that the influencers that she was paying did not have were not aware that this money came from Russia. So I believe people like Tim Pool and Dave Rubin when they say that. I really do.
hmm,
But it definitely still looks very suspicious to me because Lauren Chen was just this, I don't know, she was just this influencer. It wasn't like she was like top of the top, and yet she just had this ability to create this media conglomerate and pay these influencers an unbelievable amount of money to do nothing, to literally just keep doing their thing under the banner of tenant media. Like, where did she
mm,
get that money? It's a very, very
yeah.
suspicious to me. But yes, I don't know all of the details of that case. We'll see. Like I said, we'll see how it plays out. But
Mm.
in terms of the wider question of foreign funding, I
Well,
don't
we know where
think
Tucker's getting his money from. I think
right.
that's kind of
But I
obvious,
don't. But
and
I don't.
others.
But remember, but Tucker was huge before Qatar. Tucker was
Correct. Correct.
the number one biggest news anchor on cable TV. So Tucker
Except
doesn't
that it
need
was
to
after
pay.
he started getting his funding is when he started to change his narrative. Is what I'm
Right.
noticing, right?
Well, this is what I
That's
think.
the key factor, at least.
Well, I think that there's two things that I don't think that foreign funding chooses people to endorse um, that don't already have the same views that they have. So I don't think
Okay.
it's like Tucker had different views, then he was offered money and he changed his views. I think they saw Tucker saying certain things here and there that they liked. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, more of this, please. More of this,
Right.
right? Um,
Yeah.
it's not really it's not really lucrative or logical to think that the Qataris or the Chinese or the Russians are going to pick people who don't have views sympathetic to them, and then they're going to be like, I'm going to pay you and now you're going to change your views. No, they're looking for people who are already sympathizing with their views, right? So I mean, even
Hmm.
before Tucker left Fox, he was very sympathetic to Russia in the Ukraine war. I mean, there were clues here, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's more what's going on is that our enemies are choosing people that they see an opening with that can align with them on certain issues, and then they're amplifying that and weaponizing that and magnifying that.
Hmm.
I think that yes, that is probably what happened with people like my Andrew Tate and Myron Gaines. I do not think though that these people we're nobodies, and then our enemies are just bringing them to the top. I think that these people are like, they are organically coming up in the world of social media and, on the online, atmosphere.
Hmm.
And our enemies are seeing these people that are kind of gaining purchase in their own little niche communities, right? And they are
Yeah.
making them even bigger than they already are. And that's essentially too what's happening with this Israel stuff, right? There are real divisions and schisms right now in society, in the churches, on the ground, over the issue of Israel and Jews. And our enemies
Hmm.
are just amplifying it 100-fold. And how do
Correct.
we know that? We know that because we have the entire declassified, library, the all the archives of the Soviet Union doing exactly this. We have the specific targets and exactly the operations, the information warfare that they employed, and this is how they always did it. This is how the CCP does it. This is how, the U.S. did it at one point in time, when they were kind of going tit for tat with Soviet Union, and then they kind of stopped. But but what makes us think that Russia, just because it's a new regime, doesn't use the same KGB tactics when they have a commander in chief that literally worked for the KGB, that was a KGB agent, and the
Right.
CCB, the early iterations of the party, of the Chinese Communist Party, was trained by the Soviets. And the Islamists, look at the PLO, and a lot of the Islamist factions we see that stem from the Middle East. These people were also Soviet trained. They know how to employ, information warfare. They know how to do it,
Hmm.
and we have all of the archives and the unsealed documents to learn about it. So
Yeah.
it's very ignorant and naive to think that those sorts of operations would not be at play today in order to, like you said, divide America and to weaken America, because a divided America is an unstable America. It is a weak America. And there's nothing that our enemies want more. There's nothing that China and Russia and Iran and North Korea want more than to destabilize America. Qatar is a little bit of a different story because they're playing both sides, right? So they're an enemy in one way, but they're
Hmm.
an ally, in another way. But certainly certainly our enemies that are outspoken about, wanting a weak America and wanting an America that is confined to the Western Hemisphere would be. It's clear that they would be, initiating operations to make that happen.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I think, again, people kind of miss the big picture because they don't see all these different influences because they come from different directions. So you have the Islamists, right, that are about spreading global jihad, that will promote the far left, right, because they're easy pawns, they're easy, how to say, useful idiots
Useful
for their
idiots.
causes,
Yeah.
right? And then, but then you also have, like you're pointing out, China, Russia, Soviet or the communist nations,
Hmm.
right? That for years have wanted to bring the downfall of the United States.
Yes.
And again, it's a superpower struggle that's been happening for years, not just over, just yesterday. It kind of came out of
Yes.
nowhere. And so I think people just they forget because they say, "Oh, the Cold War's over," so they forget. Like, no, it's not over. It's like, are you kidding me? Look at all South America. Look at all over Africa. I mean, it's like it's everywhere. You
Right.
see these influences for those who know the world a little bit, or traveled. Um, can you explain a little bit how that that operates? How is it
Yeah.
that these groups that technically have nothing in common, but they find the common enemy, which typically is, I'm sure you're going to point out what it is that unifies their causes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why conservatives are very susceptible right now, particularly to Russian infiltration, is because we don't believe any narrative that blames Russia for any sort of narrative or information warfare. Because the left was like Russia, Russia, Russia for 8 years. anybody who was disagreeing with them or questioning their methods, you are a Russian agent. Well, that's a lot of wear and tear on conservatives, like who would otherwise maybe be more be more willing to listen to like a potential like Russian operation going on here. But now if anybody says, oh, that's you're if anybody says you're parroting Russian disinformation or that's like a Russian operation, as a conservative, you're going to be like, you sound like the Dems. That's what the Dems have been saying for 8 years. Anything they don't agree with is Russia. So you know, we have our guards down to actually be infiltrated by Russia, because we have our guards up to disbelieve anything comes from Russia. And somebody like Trevor Loudon, you should have him on your show if you haven't already. He's amazing, and he's studied like post Cold War, Russian like counterintelligence operations, and he will tell you how Russia penetrated the conservative community after the Cold War very heavily, because they were trying to revive their image, and they knew that conservatives were so anti-Soviet, anti-communist, that they wanted to convince our side of the aisle that they were like a proud Christian anti-communist nation. And so they invested heavily in their image, and they infiltrated Christian conservative groups. And we're seeing the residual effects of that today, where you have people that are not just they're not just providing like a critical nuanced take of the Ukraine war, but they are 100% taking a Putin is the good guy stance, right? Like it's not just
Yeah.
like I've been very critical of the Ukraine war, of Biden just throwing millions and hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to Zelensky, much of which gets lost and
Yeah.
doesn't seem to actually be advancing the fight against Russia. But that doesn't mean that I think Putin is on our side. And that doesn't mean that I
Exactly.
believe Putin when he is giving lip service to like the anti woke side of the aisle. Like, and yet it's like conservatives are so gullible. They actually hear this man and they're like, oh no, he's like an anti woke, manly authoritarian leader who
Yeah.
protects his Christians, and like just
Correct.
lies, just like such lies about Russia. And
Yeah.
it's like, if this guy was on our side, why is he allied with China? Why is he allied with Iran? Why is he allied with
Yeah.
Venezuela, with Cuba, with Colombia, with Chile, with North Korea? It makes no sense. Like, just all you have to do is look at the alliances to understand who is an ally of America and who is not.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And you're right. And people are fooled because they hear something that sounds familiar, that sounds close to home. Like you said, the way Putin portrays himself as pro Christianity, pro family,
Right.
anti homosexuality, anti all this junk from the far left. Um, and then he ironically gains support from those that actually should realize, like, no, he's no friend of us in the West,
Right.
not at all. because
And also,
because if you knew
Christians
what
aren't
his
doing so good in Russia. It's a lie.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, and then the irony is where everybody kind of unifies their and puts their hatred towards, right. It gets focused on Israel, right. And now with Tucker interviewing, now what is it, the third Christian so-called representative of the Christians from Israel, all three of them not from Israel,
Right.
just to be clear. I've met with the actual Christians from Israel. I'm part of those Israelis that are helping the Christian cause for the Israeli Christians. We just met with Mike Huckabee a few weeks ago, and it created a big stir within the Christian mainstream denominations here, who wrote a letter to kind of counter it, because they don't see this guy representing them. Whatever. It's actually the PA putting using their influence and intimidation and pressuring these bishops to try to counter that, because they don't want to lose the control over the Christian community here in Israel. That's the
Mm.
reality of what's happening. So I don't see Tucker interviewing those Christians, and I can give him a list of names of the
Of
actual
course.
who's who here. He'll never interview them, because they're not going to give the narrative that's anti-Israel and that's as if pro-Christian. And this is something, like you said, they prey on people's ignorance. I've been telling Christians for years, because I get to speak at churches around the world, actually, not just in the U.S., but globally. So I kind of get the beat of what's happening, not just in the United States, in Europe, and different Africa, and wherever I've been. But I've noticed that in America, people in the church who have used to be conservative, pro-Israel, they never really noticed their blind spot that within their community, because of ignorance to biblical understanding of why I should stand with Israel, so to speak, right? That they're going to be easy prey to these
Mm.
influences. And here we see it today coming from the church. Here we see it from the conservative side, and then hence this is also why I've put out this, or helped put out this petition to counter that, through my Christian, actual Christian conservative friends who wrote a petition to counter Tucker and Candace and Fuentes, who claim to be Christian and really are just anti-Semites.
Yes.
So people kind of miss that, and that's something I tried to warn about for years, and hopefully they're paying attention now, and they're realizing that these were real signs that I saw. Again, they were small, but when you leave things unsettled with it obviously can blow out of proportion, and our enemies are using that. Our enemies are using that, and they're
Absolutely.
amplifying these voices.
Hmm. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
evangelicals are being targeted so heavily right now. I always say evangelicalism is the last bastion of philo-Semitism in the United States. And Jews have been so inopportune for they have really not understood um, how much evangelicals are with us in this fight. And now we are losing them one person
Yeah.
at a time. And I really, really think it's time for Jews to get serious and realize that we need to like step out of our little bubbles, and we need to harness the already like existing like biblical connection, the metaphysical and spiritual connection that exists between Jews and Christians in the Bible, and we need to practically harness that now. And it's really a I've noticed lately, like there's a few anti-Semites online who just like I guess they have like no life. They love to find like a nobody like me and and clip me and and then I'll go viral for being a Zionist who's saying that Israel should Israel should use counterintelligence against our enemies in the same way that like every other, every other government does. But like suddenly that means that like, I'm pulling the strings and I'm like, whatever. And it's like, it's amazingly flattering, first of all, because I'm, like I said, I'm a nobody. I was a behind the scenes producer and, just started speaking about this, and now I'm writing a book about it, right? I wish I had
Yeah.
the power to do things that I speak about. That I say I want Israel to do, or I want Jews to do, if I had a magic wand, right, and make things the way they
Yeah.
are. But the anti-Semites, they actually, it's so flattering, like they assign us individually such power and control, right? Like I live in
Yeah.
these people's heads as somebody who like has real influence, like because, and all it takes for them to think that is the fact that I'm a Zionist. That's it. If I am a Zionist, then to them, I have this unbelievable control to like manipulate world governments and to change the culture. And so when I talk about things that, as I wish they were, that to them is actually like, oh, look at the things that she's actually doing. And
Hmm.
and and it's like and so I digress, but the only reason I'm saying that is because like when we are having these conversations and we are brainstorming about how we can keep the conservative party, a a morally guided and ethically guided like spiritual outfit, and we are talking about ways in which to do that, like it's it's interesting how the anti-Semites will fault us for doing that. when in
Hmm.
reality, if any other community was facing this microscope on them, they would have to start getting creative and think outside of the box to save their community and to save their and to save the principles upon like which their greater greater community or society or nation was founded upon. Like they would be having these conversations, right? We've been
Yeah.
forced into it. And yet the anti-Semites like they look at our creative brainstorming and our ideas for solutions as like evidence of our like global influence. It's like this unbelievable cycle of just brain rot, right? Like it's really insane.
Yeah. It is. And but you know what it shows me too, because like you said, like I get the, a lot of these haters, and they're all over my platform and everything, and I kind of mess with them. I'll just say, after I'll have a little debate and basically, prove them to be absolute moronic in their points and whatever, and not having actual factual proof to any of their claims. Then I'll just kind of end with something like, well, thank you anyways for supporting this Zionist by,
Mhm.
commenting, by being in, because the more you keep talking about me, the more you're amplifying my voice. So thank you. Kind of like what, and I took that from what's his name, Seinfeld. I forget his name. The
Jerry
um,
Seinfeld.
Jerry Seinfeld. Yeah, hello. Yeah, the guy from Seinfeld, right?
Yeah,
But I took that from him, right? Because he kind of was making fun of the pro pally people in his shows. Oh, here they are again, and he's like,
thanks for
well, you
buying a
should
ticket
tell.
to my show. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
thanks for buying tickets. And I was like, oh, it's so good, it's so rich. And
yeah.
you're right, but it shows to me. It shows that because what we're doing is we're hitting the nerve of the problem, and because you're speaking truth into that, and we're shining light into that obscurity and mess and disinformation, then it's that truth that confronts them that they don't know how to confront with facts, right?
Mm,
And so they get frustrated, they get angry because they're all about emotion, and it's like, oh, I'm so annoyed, I don't know how to counter that. And you're really just exposing your ignorance, aren't you?
mm.
By making those claims and inflammatorying it and making
Right.
you into the great, or me into this great Zionist, conspirator.
Superpower.
That's,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's like, what are you joking? Like,
yeah.
I don't have any power to control things or anything. I just have my online platform, and it's, like, oh, it's huge. I tell you what.
Hmm. No, totally. It's ridiculous.
So, basically, do you have any concluding thoughts that you wanted to end with, to kind of help people, um, to help people with this issue, and how do they find the truth behind all of these conspiracies that you were talking about, the
Mm,
disinformation,
mm.
all these influences that are coming, affecting the right, it's coming from everywhere.
Right.
So how,
Well, I
what
think
are people to do with all that?
if we're talking, if I'm speaking, it depends on the audience that I'm speaking to, right?
Yeah.
Because different audiences understand these things differently. But if I'm speaking to my fellow brethren, and ostensibly these people are moderate or conservative Jews, like I would say, if you are flabbergasted by what you're seeing now in this right wing culture in America, then it's kind of on you to really dig deep and understand where it comes from and to understand what's going on. Okay, it's not all Qatar. It's not all Qatar just paying
Right.
everybody, okay? And it's not only Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes. Like I think that if Jews really want to understand it, they need to understand MAGA. They need to understand MAGA principles. And if they think that they can address anti-Semitism in our space by calling for removing people from social media, right? Like I
Hmm.
mean, you have just lost the plot because I'm a
Correct.
Jew concerned about anti Semitism and I do not support that. And so,
Right.
certainly, you're not going to move any needles with anybody else by saying, oh, to fix anti Semitism, we need to, Elon Musk needs to crack down on X and remove Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens from the platform. Like that is not the answer. That's not going to fix anti-Semitism, and it certainly isn't going to change any hearts and minds. So if you're concerned about
Yeah.
this, then I think you should be equally concerned about the ways to fight it that actually preserve conservative principles, that preserve the First Amendment, that preserve the entire MAGA ethos that Trump ran on, which is might be very difficult to understand, especially if you're based somewhere else in Israel and you don't understand the tension between like state rights and the federal government and things like that. But all I have to say is we have our work cut out for us. You got to do twice as much work here if you want to fight it on our side than if you want to fight it on the left, because it's not a one size fits all solutions. You cannot employ the same methods to fight Jew hatred on the left that you would on the right. And why would you, when you understand that Jew hatred manifests in sometimes there's overlap, of course, but there's also very unique ways that Jew hatred manifests on the right that are very theological, that where they don't even tackle that on the left. So obviously you would have to employ different solutions. And so yeah, that's what I would just say as like kind of a guiding principle moving forward for your audience, if in fact they are
Mhm.
moderate and conservative Jews.
Well, I hope so. And one point that you were talking about earlier is about how, in a way, the Jewish community has kind of failed in reaching out and being able to connect with the evangelical world mainly, right, as the kind of the
Yes.
mainstream of those that have shown reform in the church attitude towards the Jews and so on. And that's something that's bothered me. And I'll get, because again, people say, "Oh, you don't criticize yourself." Oh, I'm going to criticize us. I was actually at the Christian event in Jerusalem. I think it was, I'm trying to remember if it was during COVID or whatever. It was before the war, and they had a mass gathering at the southern steps to finalize I think it was Isaiah 61. Forgive me, guys, if I'm ruining it. It was like Isaiah 61 or 62 something fast that they were doing. It was like, I think like a month fast and praying globally, praying for Israel, and they kind of culminated in Jerusalem with all these big leaders. And I remember standing actually next to Michelle Bachmann, and she didn't realize it, but I just noticed that she was low on security. And so I just felt, I think I should be next to her in case something goes down here, because
Mm,
from my experience in executive protection, things can go down really bad, especially anywhere in Jerusalem where you have all these religious tensions and whatever. And so as these Christians were gathering and doing their thing, you had a Jewish group led by the number two deputy mayor of Jerusalem chanting insults towards this Christian group. And I was mortified and ashamed as a
yeah.
Jew in the state of Israel that somebody who's representing Jerusalem, which is supposed to protect the three monotheistic religions and rights and holy sites, right, of all places in the world, and that this moron is gathering with a group of Jews saying
Yeah.
that these are proselytizers and this and that. I'm like, oh my Lord, this is so embarrassing, you
I
know?
know, it's so myopic. There are proselytizers
Oh,
there that go there. There are
yeah,
proselytizers, Christian proselytizers, and that's something that I don't think a lot of people know. But like for
yeah,
these religious Jews to just decide that any Christian who's there
yeah,
is a proselytizer, oh my God, that is so sinister. That is just like so myopic.
yeah. Exactly. And so again, it's because of ignorance. It's because the Jewish community is terrified of the church. They're terrified because of our history with the church. And so what I'm saying, and I'm just
Yes.
going to want to reamplify what you said there, we need to get over that. We need to quit being so
Yes.
sensitive to the church
Hmm.
and learn
Hmm.
who our friends are and get, like you said, we need to get educated. And in the same
Hmm.
breath, my challenge to my Christian friends, read your Bible,
Mm.
because the Bible, and I'm saying cover to cover, Genesis through Revelation, read the
Yes.
Bible, because when you
Yeah.
read through Genesis through Revelation, you will understand also the Jewish people and your connection
Yes.
and roots with the Jewish people and the Jewish faith, and that we are one in a way. We're a
There's a
continuation, or we're
continuity.
one.
Yes.
There's a continuity. We're not completely separate 100%, like history has tried to divide us. We have way more in common, way
Hmm.
more connection, and we can
Yes.
get over our differences. We can work over those differences,
Yeah.
but we have to respect each other, understand each other, and the best way to do it is educate yourself. And many Christians might read the New Testament, but you don't read it in whole. Read from Matthew all the way through Revelation, but start in Genesis, because then
Hmm.
when you read through the New Testament, it's going to open up your perspective and you're going to know where it came from, because these are Jewish people writing about Jewish concepts that start with the five books of Moses,
Yes.
and that's what Jesus taught on, and all the parables and so on. So get yourself educated, Jewish community, get into get into your faith, get rooted into your faith. And to me, that's really going to fix a lot of these problems, because when we're rooted in our faith, which is the backbone to the Judeo-Christian values of America and Israel, and that's what we have in what we share in value, and that's what we can fight for and protect. But the more ignorant we are of those foundations, then it's easier to be swayed by all kinds of different isms that come out of nowhere and try to pull us whichever which way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful interview. This was awesome. Hopefully, this has helped educate some of the crowd out here. I really appreciate your time that you've taken with us this morning. Thank you so much. Folks, again, at the end of the interview here, you're going to have in the description area, you're going to have all the social links, and you can get further informed, further educated. And again, share this, because you're not going to, it's not going to show up on your feed. So
Yeah.
if you want your friends to see this, if you want your friends to be informed, because again, we don't control the media like everybody says we do, then that's the only way we can help counter this crazy information war, is with truth. Because I also believe at the end of the day, truth will prevail. And for those who really are seeking truth, they will find it. But unfortunately, these days you have to dig for it, and it's a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make it easier for people to engage with the truth and to be informed. And I think we got some good information for you all here today that will help destroy some of these misconceptions and misinformation that's out there. Have a wonderful week, guys, and shalom from Israel.
Thank you.